as the interest of big business and woke corporate America continue to really embrace a social agenda that is contrary to American values and to the families of many of the families, the American families that actually shop in their stores and use their businesses and services. What we're seeing finally is that Republicans are realizing that corporate America is going a different direction and that their social policies that they've embraced from the left are incompatible with Republican values. And so those that are running for office, we've seen this trend over the last decade, moving away from the corporate dollars, the big PAC dollars, and turning to small donations from the people who elect them. I think this is a great, great development. And that means that the business community is losing influence on Capitol Hill. Now, it's a big shift from the days when corporate and industry PACs propelled such campaigns. Now, the interest of Wall Street and the Chamber of Commerce increasingly do not match those of voters concerned by the international outsourcing of jobs, the mass illegal immigration, woke corporate initiatives. How might this influence legislation that affects working families? And how could this reshape America? Joining me now to discuss this and much more is Dr. Ben Carson. He's the former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, a 2016 Republican presidential candidate, and the pioneering former director of the pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. He is now the founder and chairman of the American Cornerstone Institute. Dr. Carson, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony. It's always nice to be with you.
It's good to see you. Before we jump into this topic, you are going to be one of our featured speakers at this year's Pray Vote Stand Summit, September the 15th through the 17th. And also today we're announcing that former President Donald Trump will be there, as well as Governor Ron DeSantis. So a great lineup of American leaders that are going to be there September 15th through the 17th.
Well, I'm delighted that they are paying attention to values and our faith and the things that really made us into a great nation. So continue to encourage them, and thank you for providing the forum.
Well, you are always one of our favorite speakers, and the American people love to hear from you. I want to talk about this topic of what's happening with Republicans in corporate America. When you ran for president in 2016, you were commended for building a small dollar donation machine. Tell us about that and where you turned for support.
Well, it was pretty amazing. A lot of people who are running now or who are planning on running ask me, how did you do that? How did you get all of that money and all that support? I have to be honest with you. I didn't plan it. I just got out there and started talking, and people started supporting me. And even when I dropped out, I had to beg people to stop sending money. I think people are very much looking for decency and honesty. And that's something that's sorely lacking in Washington, D.C. right now. And I think people should spend a lot of time researching the people that they're going to be voting for and trying to determine if, in fact, they're simply politicians who are people who do what's politically expedient, or are they true patriots and people who are truly interested in moving America forward?
Yeah, when going all the way back before you even stepped into the political arena, I remember when you spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. I mean, you just spoke and you told the truth. And I actually think you're right. I think Americans are just looking for people who will shoot straight with them, speak the truth, not the politically correct nonsense that that people feel like they have to speak so they're not canceled or they're not ignored by the media. And I think people rally to that.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking of canceled, I found out today that our American Cornerstone Facebook page was being taken down because they say it violates their principles. Talking about our faith and our families and the important things that made America to a great nation violates their principles. Isn't that interesting?
That is, frankly, that's incredible. I mean, it is amazing to me as I've watched. You've had the SPLC for a while actually see you call you a threat
Yes.
to this country. In fact, let me do this before I forget about it. You actually have a new book out with the Cornerstone Institute. A new.
Yeah. Yes, it's called Freedom of Bark, and it's a children's book. And it's designed to help them to understand the concept of freedom of speech and the First Amendment and what that is about, what our freedoms are for, and why they're so precious, why we must protect them. And also, it teaches children to respect other people. If everybody's barking at the same time, you don't hear anything except a bunch of noise. And we need to learn how to listen to each other and how to work together. So vitally important. And children are so malleable. They're very impressionable. And they're also very curious, which is one of the reasons that the Marxists are so anxious to get into our children early on and to convert them. That's why Vladimir Lenin said, "Give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted." Well, we want to be just as vigorous as they are, even more vigorous in making sure that we give them the right principles. We can't shield them from all the foolishness that's going on. You can try, but it's not going to be successful.
Right.
So instead, we have to put things on the other end of the scale to balance it off and to give
Absolutely.
them at least the possibilities. And people can go to AmericanCornerstone.org or littlepatriotslearning.com to find out more about these books. All the proceeds go right back into the program to create more content. And all that content is free of charge because it's underwritten by patriotic Americans.
You can curse the darkness or you can turn on the light. And what we're talking about here is shining light. So I don't know. Are you going to have bark time story hours in libraries across the country to counteract the drag queen story hours?
We're gonna fight them very hard with all of our books. We have a continuous series of books that are coming out,
Oh,
and we also make it possible for people to request a visit, either virtual or in person. If we happen to be in an area doing something, we have no problems with stopping by a school and talking to the children, sharing some of these things with them.
well, I'd like to talk with you offline. Maybe we can encourage some of our supporters across the country, some of our community impact teams that we have in churches across the country, maybe to get these books and request opportunities to read them in the local library. And
Absolutely.
to take this information out there to the kids and encourage them with a positive message about what America is all about. I want to ask you, I want to go back to our topic of how we see Republicans now standing up after you did this, Donald Trump did this. More Republicans now in the Senate, which has kind of been the old guard that is the establishment Republicans that have been slow to break with corporate America. Are you encouraged by this development that they're saying no to woke corporate America and looking to the American people for their support?
Well, corporate America uh, has a very important purpose, and that is to reward their stockholders. Now, they can't necessarily do that if they have another agenda, uh, like being social manipulators. And I think they're starting to recognize that. And I'm glad to see also that the people are pushing back. The Anheuser-Busch thing, the Target thing, all these things I think are wake up calls for corporate America to get back to doing what they're supposed to be doing and stop meddling. Uh, one of the reasons that our country was established is because people wanted to come to a place where they could live the life that they wanted to live without it being manipulated and without all kind of mandates. And whether those mandates come from the government or from corporate America, they still have a deleterious effect on the freedoms that people experience. And the only people who can change that are we, the people. We have to put our foot down and say, this is America. This is where we are free to live the way that we want to worship the way we want to say what we want to say. And we're not going to stand for government or corporate America to try to dictate how our lives should go from cradle to grave.
It's interesting, not surprising, but interesting, Dr. Carson, that the business community that really hijacked by the left or embracing the left social policies, I don't know what they were thinking that the economic policies wouldn't follow with the leftist social policies. But just recently, the Chamber of Commerce is up in arms over the president's pick for the FTC chair, or the current FTC chair, Lena Khan, who is doing everything that business hates, and so they're up in arms. But this is, this is the chickens coming home to roost. If you want the social policy of the left, you're going to get their economic policies as well.
There's no question about that. And I'll tell you what's really interesting. If you go back and you look at the congressional record from January 10, 1963, we're talking 60 years ago, read into the congressional record were the goals of the Communist Party in America. And it is absolutely astonishing how many of those 45 goals they have accomplished. And that's part of the reason that Eisenhower was told by Khrushchev that your grandchildren's children will live under communism and we won't have to fire one shot. All of this is part of the changing of who we are. And we have to be vigilant. We have to understand what is happening, the manipulation that's going on, looking at what's going on in our school systems, how they're trying to get to our children early on in order to plant the seeds that will never be uprooted, as Lyndon said.
And as you touched on earlier, Dr. Carson, the two big barriers to the left, to the Marxist, number one is the family, and number two is religion, orthodox religious conviction. Those two things stand in the way because they have transcendent authority. They stand on something that is not shifting. And so that's why we see this all-out push to attack the family, to attack religious expression. But that tells us those are the two things that we have to fortify and strengthen as we face the days ahead.
Absolutely. Those are the things that took us from a ragtag bunch of militiamen to the pinnacle of the world in record time. And we had values, and those values enabled us to work together. You know, this was a very interesting country. Most countries have a lot more homogeneity than we did. We had people from England and France and Africa and Portugal, and they would end up in these communities in Western Kentucky or Iowa. And there might be 20 families or 50 or 100 families. They could barely communicate with each other, but they understood the concept of the common good, and the values and principles that lead to that kind of thinking. And, you know, they took care of each other. You know, if Mr. Johnson fell out of the tree and broke his leg at harvest time, everybody else harvested his crops, no questions asked. It was that kind of unity, that kind of attitude that made the difference. We've replaced that now with something that says if your neighbor has a sign in his yard that's different from your sign, he's your enemy. You know, that kind of attitude obviously leads to chaos. Jesus said it best, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
It is that idea birthed in this nation based upon Western civilization values that emanate from Christianity. Not saying that this nation has always been Christian in all of its conduct, it has not. But it is that underlying understanding that each and every human being has value because they're created in the image of God, and that we all have purpose. And as
Absolutely.
we lose that, as you pointed out, we become more of a fractured, divided society. Dr. Carson, always great to see you. Looking forward to having you at this year's Pray Vote Stand Summit.
I can't wait to be there, and thank you for providing it.